Hello everyone, welcome back to HS English. Today we'll be looking at the character of Lennie. Please feel free to like and subscribe for this video. And remember, we've already done a video on George if you want to take a look at that. Today we'll be doing an essay plan just based on Lennie in case a question on Lennie comes up. This is for IGCSE, GCSE or any kind of affiliated English course. So let's get straight to it. So the first thing about Lennie is that he's almost like the first paragraph that you can look at is that juxtaposition that's presented to Lennie between the kind of, as I've said here, between his mental and physical power. And this can be seen because he possesses an abundance of physical strength, because he's been described as the strongest person in the novel, as seen by the vivid description when Slim states how Lennie could bust every bone in his body. And again, he also receives envy from Curly because Curly suffers from short man syndrome and he hates big guys. Again, pointing to the fact that Lennie has immense kind of physical power. But again, Steinbeck almost juxtaposes Lennie's kind of physical power with his poorness when it comes to like on his mental level. Because he's been described with animalistic features which represent his personality, seeing that how Lennie almost like drags his paws, he bleats like a lamb, he's all strong as a bull. These kind of like kind of links to almost like animals here really shows that how Lennie's presented as not being very kind of mentally strong. He isn't very educated and very smart. And this almost is like a juxtaposition from Steinbeck to show that this is almost the strongest character in the novel, but on a mental note, he's really kind of poor. And again, this kind of like he ain't bright kind of quote, I think from George, is ironic because it shows how he's the character with the most physical power, but again, the weakest in terms of authority. And this kind of mental image from Lennie, the kind of AF4 context that you can kind of portray this from, the historical context that of course we all need in these essays, is the lack of social care at the time in America, and the risk of a booby hatch, which was also known as kind of like a psychiatric hospital. But of course, it wasn't really a hospital, it was just an institution to kind of keep these people away from society. And there was a fear that Lennie could be thrown into this. And in fact, it was not until, I might write it here actually, 1935, where 1935 they had a Social Security Act, which was the first time first time when kind of people who were mentally challenged were able to gain some kind of support from the state. Before this, there was no support, and that for this case, kind of the historical context you can tie with the character of Lennie. The second paragraph with the essay plan that we'll look at is Lennie kind of lacking control and awareness, even when it comes to unique strength. Similar kind of from his sense of the juxtaposition between his mental and physical power. Now we'll look at his own kind of a deep dive into his mental sense. And this can be seen through when he was playing with the mouse, and he's telling George, I was just playing with him and then he was dead. Clearly showing that Lennie lacks control and awareness, and he fails to understand the limits. And the crucial thing is with Lennie we can look at is the kind of foreshadowing or foreboding almost that comes with him, because the killing of the mice almost like foreshadows future events. Because first he kills the mice on the way to the farm, then he breaks Curly's arm, then he kills the pup, and finally he kills Curly's wife. Kind of like a chain of events that really emphasize the sense of Lennie lacking control, lacking awareness, and this kind of almost like a deep dive into the lack of mental ingenuity when it comes to Lennie. And the only other thing that you can look at when it comes to the mice actually is how for Lennie himself it's quite a nice distraction, because it almost allows him to escape the harsh reality. Not even really the mice, actually, looking at the pups also. And almost Lennie uses animals, as he was described as animalistic feature, to almost escape the harsh reality of the Great Depression, because he's an itinerant farm worker traveling through the country to find work. And as you will know, in the Great Depression, which is the kind of event that occurred in 1929 with the crash in Wall Street crash, which is all the kind of like stock market of America when it completely failed. It really sent the country into a complete recession. Many millions lost their jobs, and it forced people like Lennie and George to continuously go from ranch to find a job. And this harsh kind of reality is almost Lennie can almost avoid it through kind of a distraction, whether it comes with pups or whether it comes with mice. And that's another thing that you can have a look at Lennie if you want to kind of tie it in with the kind of historical context. Finally, we will look more at the definition of the size, kind of deep dive now. First, we looked at an overall between his size and his mental capacity. Now, when we went straight to his mental side, now we're going back to his physical side on a deep dive. And we can look at the description of Lennie's physical character by Steinbeck when it comes to the introduction. Initially, after describing George, Steinbeck describes Lennie as a huge man, shapeless of face, with large pale eyes and wide sloping shoulders. Now, Lennie is described in complete contrast to George, and his physical vastness almost like gives a kind of foreboding nature again, because like no matter how innocent he seems, and how matter he might not be very bright, his character gives himself away. His size is the focus of his introduction, a fear that could be a problem later on. And Lennie also requires guidance from George, and here we can really kind of build the friendship between them, but crucially how Lennie is a junior partner in that friendship, because everything that Lennie does is almost decided by George's commands. It was George who told him to fight Curly. It was George who told him to stay quiet in the vicinity of the boss. George, for example, carries Lennie's work cards, and there's no doubt that George here is a key pillar in Lennie's survival, and it is this kind of friendship that blossoms through kind of George's kind of commanding nature of Lennie, who actually takes care of Lennie in a time when people like Lennie, who were like not very bright, didn't receive a lot of support, especially when everyone was just trying to fend for themselves to find a job because of the harsh reality of the Great Depression. For example, George also tells Lennie to hide in that bush. And again, as Lennie you can tie it back to the animalistic sense as well, how Lennie reacts defensively initially to George by saying that he can always go live in a cave, representing his animalistic nature and description that there was almost like no support for people like Lennie. The quote, of course, is here. I'm just going to highlight it. That is from the book. And again, the A for the historical context is you can look at people only concerned about themselves because of the nature of being a migrant worker, the lack of jobs, the lack of money, and the depression that was undergoing in America. And mental diseases were only just really being understood after World War One. You've got shell shock, for example. And therefore, there was very, very little support for Lennie. And that's why his friendship with George can be seen as a really, important sense in the Lennie's survival. And in fact, it's George at the end who actually shoots Lennie, ironically to keep Lennie away from being lynching. But this kind of almost friendship between George and Lennie almost defines and is crucial basically to Lennie's survival. So yeah, that's the character of Lennie. So what we've done first is we've looked at both Lennie's kind of like mental and physical power, and then we've just deep dive onto his lack of mental kind of capacity, and then we've deep dive onto his physical description, and that I think could be a really, really good essay plan. Thank you.